Hey everybody, welcome back to another video. So today I want to talk about, as ever, the collected correspondence of Allen Ginsberg and Neal Cassady. So to be completely honest, after reading this book, it really just blends together with all the other stuff that I've read on the Beat Generation and Neal Cassady, Jack Kerouac. It just really is a continuation of all the knowledge that I've learned over the past many months reading about the Beat Generation. But what makes this book very interesting, obviously it's a collection of letters that Allen Ginsberg and Neal Cassady sent each other. So a lot of the events that I'm reading about are events that I know very well. Even some of the letters that Neal Cassady wrote are letters that I've already read in the collected letters of Neal Cassady. But this book is interesting because you're getting Allen Ginsberg's point of view of the events that are depicted in the book On the Road. Just the events that took place in Jack Kerouac's life, Neal Cassady's life. You're getting Allen Ginsberg actually writing and reflecting about these events. And that's not really a point of view that you hear very often when you read about the Beat Generation. Obviously, Allen Ginsberg is a great poet. His poems that he wrote are really a very central part of the Beat Generation writing, but you don't get a lot of just straight narrative from Allen Ginsberg's point of view. And that's what you really get in this book. You get him actually talking about and reflecting on what's going on. And obviously the center of this back and forth letters between the two writers, it's really focused on their very strange love affair that they had. And this is very interesting to read about, the 1940s, 1950s, where homosexuality wasn't something that was talked about very openly. So it's interesting to read about this happening back then with Neal Cassady and Allen Ginsberg. And the love affair that they had, you definitely see, at least I felt that Allen Ginsberg, when he writes about the relationship, he seems very sincere. Like he really has a lot of passion for Neal Cassady and really cares about the relationship, wants the relationship to go somewhere. But you can see that Neal really is using Allen. He's using him to learn how to write, to learn about philosophy, to become this intellectual person that he wants to be. So the relationship is more focused on what Neal is getting out of Allen. And I think that really just reflects that Neal is a very manipulative person. He uses people to get what he wants. And you definitely see in his writing that he really mirrors Allen's style of writing in the way that he writes. I think that's also how Neal really learned how to perfect his writing style by, corresponding with people like Allen Ginsberg. But you definitely see how he really tailors his writing, the things he talks about, to try to lure Allen in, to use him to, extract information and just how, to become this intellectual person that he wants to be. And what I also found really interesting reading these letters here is Neal Cassady and Allen Ginsberg were central figures in American counterculture. When you think about American counterculture, especially in the 1960s, you think about people who really wanted to change the world. They wanted to make the world something better. But in the 1940s and 1950s, these counterculture icons, they weren't really focused on changing the world. They were focused on changing their very immediate reality, because they talk about a lot of big ideas, a lot of big things, but they're not talking about, the world as a whole. They're talking about their own lives and finding meaning in their own lives. And that's really the distinction I think that you see between, the Beats and the hippies, is that the Beats were trying just to find meaning in their own life, but the hippies were more trying to create this utopian vision of what they thought the world could be. But you definitely see the origins of that in the Beat Generation. And in Allen Ginsberg's writing and Neal Cassady's, their letters to each other, I think you really see the center of that happening, the center of them trying to find meaning in their own lives. And I think their relationship is really the core of the Beat Generation. And that's why this is just a really interesting collection of letters. And over the past months, I've read a lot of writing by Neal Cassady and Jack Kerouac. This is my first time really reading Allen Ginsberg's writing, as I said before. And I really picked up when reading this that Allen Ginsberg is really the confluence of Jack Kerouac and Neal Cassady, because Neal Cassady in his writing, you really get the sense that he's on the run. He's writing on the run, and Kerouac is really on the road, trying to go somewhere. And Ginsberg is kind of the center of gravity of those two ways of life. And he just really reflects, I think, both of those people. And you see how Cassady and Kerouac really learned from Allen Ginsberg, how Allen Ginsberg really learned from Cassady and Kerouac. So the three of them really exchanged ideas with each other. And really, you don't really have the Beat Generation unless you have the three of them becoming friends. And that's really the center of the Beat Generation. And reading Allen Ginsberg's reflections on what's going on, you see how he is the center of the Beat Generation. He's the true center of gravity of all these people moving around the country and writing, and just everything goes along with the Beat Generation. And you definitely see that Allen Ginsberg is kind of the ambassador to both the Beats and the hippies, because Jack Kerouac is the full embodiment of the Beat Generation. When you think of the Beat Generation, you immediately think of Jack Kerouac. But Neal Cassady, I think as time goes on, as you get into the late 50s, early 60s, you really see him being much more of a central person in the hippie movement. Looking at the Merry Band of Pranksters and Ken Kesey. And the spirit of Neal Cassady is really what fueled the spirit of the 1960s, spirit of the hippies. And Allen Ginsberg maintained friendships with people in the Beats and people in the hippie movement. And he's really this back and forth between the two movements. And he's the person who kind of draws the Beats and the hippies together into this one era of American counterculture from late 1940s through the early 1970s. And after reading Allen Ginsberg's writing here, you really see that Allen Ginsberg is really this idealistic 20-something-year-old. Just the way he talks about life and the world, he's very idealistic. He has this very idealistic vision of what life should be. And he's just a really interesting person to talk about. It just makes you think of all these hipster people in their 20s just reflecting about philosophy and just life. And that's what I really see in Allen Ginsberg's writing. And it's also cool to see the development of his poetry in his letters. When he's talking to Neal Cassady, he's sending him bits and pieces of poems that he's working on. And you see him really aspiring to be this great poet. And that's what he becomes. And it's cool seeing the development of that, how he slowly is building towards that. And like I said before, you see his writing develop. You see how he's learning from Neal Cassady, how Neal Cassady is learning from him. And you really see this writing style develop as the letters go on, as their relationship evolves. And you see a lot more interest in Eastern philosophies and just weird, interesting ways of life that weren't very common, 1940s, 1950s. Like, they're really foreshadowing where I think counterculture eventually goes in the 1960s. So, yeah, not much to say about this. It's really just a continuation of what I already read. I think at this point I've read so much that it's hard for me to give a real, a good opinion of this book, because it just blends with everything that I've learned. I'm learning, some more facts in this, some more things, Allen Ginsberg's point of view, but it's really just, I think, a good supplemental material to get some more, letters that they wrote, just kind of see their, evolving writing style. But yeah, it's interesting, like I said. Like, if you want to understand Allen Ginsberg, not just through his poetry, I think this is a really good book just to see what he was thinking, what was going on in his life during this time period. But yeah, that's, as ever, Eclectic Correspondence to Allen Ginsberg and Neal Cassady. Be sure to subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.